Welcome to Podkey Slopcast, where AI hype gets unpacked before it hardens into conventional wisdom. A lot of this week comes down to who gets access, who gets believed, and who gets to define the story. You can see it in model licensing, prediction markets, red team panic, and even the chip shortage narrative. The biggest structural story here is the emerging US AI licensing regime, even if nobody is quite calling it that in formal legal terms. What's being described is an informal, ad hoc process where access to frontier models can hinge on government approval and company-by-company discretion without a clear public rulebook. That matters because gatekeeping is one thing when it is explicit, legislated, and contestable. It's another when it operates through private conversations, selective previews, and opaque judgments about who counts as safe or strategic. OpenAI's signal around GPT 5.6 makes the point pretty starkly. The plan is a limited preview to select partners with US government approval on a customer-by-customer basis, and even OpenAI is signaling this is not the preferred long-term model. So the confirmed fact is limited rollout and government involvement. The harder question is what this becomes in practice. Critics argue it widens the gap between public models and the models reserved for privileged labs and favored institutions. That argument is pretty well supported on its face, because scarcity plus discretion almost always advantages incumbents with policy relationships, compliance teams, and national security credibility. What is less clear is whether that gap is temporary friction during a sensitive period or the start of a durable two-tier AI ecosystem. The trade-off is real. Restricting access can reduce misuse risk at the edge, but it can also concentrate capability, weaken competition, and leave smaller firms, researchers, and civil society stuck evaluating the future with downgraded tools. That's why calls for congressional intervention or clearer policy are not just procedural nitpicking. If access is going to be controlled, the argument is that the criteria should be visible, appealable, and democratically grounded. That same access politics spilled into prediction markets around Fable 5. Odds of a release by July 1 jumped above 60% after reports of more constructive White House engagement with Anthropic co-founder Tom Brown. The important distinction is that the market moved on interpretation, not on a product announcement, a launch date, or a binding commitment. In other words, traders were pricing a story about smoother government-company relations, possibly unlocking release conditions. That doesn't make the move irrational. If regulatory bottlenecks are informal, then informal political signals become economically meaningful. But it does show how fragile these markets can be. They often look like hard probabilities when they may actually be thinly traded reactions to vibes, selective reporting, or perceived insider temperature. The second-order effect is interesting too. Once markets move, they can feed coverage, and coverage can make a speculative timeline feel more concrete than it is. So this episode is less evidence that Fable 5 is imminent, and more evidence that AI timelines now depend partly on reading power relationships in Washington. The Mythos story is a useful case study in how quickly technical findings get turned into public alarm. An NSA Red Team exercise reportedly found Mythos had substantially higher capabilities than previously recognized. That is the core finding, and it is significant. If a controlled test reveals stronger than expected performance, that should update safety assessments, procurement assumptions, and maybe even policy urgency. But then the framing appears to have outrun the facts. Media coverage blurred the line between a controlled exercise and a real intrusion into classified systems, which helped fuel rumors that Mythos had actually broken into the NSA. Those are very different claims. One says the model performed impressively in a test. The other says it penetrated operational national security infrastructure. The source material supports the first and says the second was a misinterpretation. High-profile warnings, including from Senator Mark Warner, can be understandable in that environment, but they also raise the stakes for precision. When officials sound alarms, the public often compresses nuance into a simpler and scarier story. The broader lesson is not that concern is overblown, it's that safety discourse gets weaker when capability evaluations and real-world compromise events are treated as interchangeable. On the business side, KPMG's Q2 Global AI Pulse survey says CEO-directed AI initiatives were 3 times more likely to deliver measurable ROI than projects with weaker executive involvement. That sounds almost obvious, but it's useful to unpack why. Executive sponsorship usually means budget, authority to change workflows, tolerance for cross-functional coordination, and someone senior enough to force adoption when middle layers stall. So the survey may be capturing more than leadership enthusiasm, it may be capturing organizational capacity. The report also links strong top-level involvement with strategies like open-source adoption or custom-trained models that improve cost savings and data sovereignty. That is plausible because those approaches often require a longer planning horizon and more institutional commitment than simply buying a generic AI subscription. Still, correlation is not proof of causation. The strongest companies may both empower CEOs to drive AI and already have the talent and infrastructure needed to succeed. Even so, the broader takeaway holds up fairly well. AI ROI seems less about sprinkling tools across a company and more about whether leadership is willing to redesign processes around them. Anthropic's Claude Tag is a more tactical product story, but it points to a larger shift. The feature embeds a full Claude instance directly into Slack, so users can tag the model from any channel and kick off background work without coding. That lowers the barrier dramatically. Instead of going to a separate interface or needing workflow tooling, the AI shows up in the place where teams already coordinate. Anthropic says 65% of its code generation now originates from conversational requests in Slack. If that number is directionally accurate, it suggests AI use is becoming more collaborative, ambient, and socially embedded. The upside is speed and accessibility. The risk is that convenience can outrun governance, because work triggered casually in chat may still touch sensitive systems, budgets, or decision paths. So this is not just a product integration, it is a shift in where AI labor gets initiated and who feels empowered to invoke it. The last cluster of stories is really about whether advanced AI will stay centralized. On one side, technologists are mobilizing to build large open-source model collections, sometimes described in deliberately wild rhetoric as psychotic swarms, to stop advanced access from being monopolized by a few institutions. Strip away the rhetoric, and the strategic claim is straightforward. If frontier access tightens, open ecosystems become a counterweight. At the same time, large enterprises are increasingly trying to secure their own compute so they can post-train models like GLM 5.2 internally for cost efficiency and data sovereignty. That suggests a growing belief that open architectures plus internal training can be good enough or at least economically superior for many serious use cases. The bottleneck is hardware, which makes Micron's earnings story important. The guidance points to a persistent structural shortage across the AI hardware supply chain, not a simple cooldown. That directly contradicts early bubble burst narratives. If shortages are continuing, demand for AI compute is still strong enough to strain supply. But there's a tension here. OPK model licensing may centralize software access, while hardware scarcity can centralize the capacity to train and customize alternatives. So even if open source improves, the ability to use it at scale may still skew toward governments, hyperscalers, and large enterprises with capital. The through line this week is that AI power is being shaped as much by access control and infrastructure as by model quality itself. That's it for Podkey Slopcast. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.